Welcome to Beyond the Reiki Gateway with Reiki Masters Kathleen Johnson and Andrea Kennedy. This podcast is sponsored by listeners just like you through donations. Links to help support our all-volunteer effort are in the show notes and also on our website, beyondthereikigateway.com. And now it is time to begin our journey together beyond the Reiki Gateway.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kathleen Johnson.
And I'm Andrea Kennedy.
And we welcome you to another episode of Beyond the Reiki Gateway. We're very happy to have you here with us and very grateful that you continue to listen and support our show. We love doing it and we love having you as our listeners. Today, we're taking a different approach in the podcast. We're going to be talking about a book that I read quite a few years ago when I was taking courses at Atlantic University, a university that is in Virginia Beach and that was founded by Edgar Cayce. We will go into that in a little bit more detail very soon. And the book is called The Past Lives of Jesus. It's written by a man named Glenn Sanderfur, and we will, of course, have a link to the book in the show notes of this episode. For some reason, Andrea and I got into the subject of this when we were speaking a while ago. And Andrea was so interested in the topic, she went ahead and ordered the book for herself. And then we decided we would actually do an episode about the past lives of Jesus. So here we are. I'm well aware that this could be a challenging topic for many of you. And I have to confess that when I first saw this book, it was challenging for me for many reasons. However, I consider myself, and I know Andrea does too, as a seeker. As a seeker, we are always looking and seeking for new knowledge, new perspectives, new growth. So I'm going to invite all of you to put on your seeking hat, if you will, and listen as we go along describing this book and the wisdom that is contained therein, and invite you to remain open and aware, and honestly just see how this lands with you. Does it resonate? If so, are you interested in learning more? In other words, just remain open and curious.
Curious is right, Kathleen. When this book came up in that conversation that you referenced, I was a bit taken aback. I thought, wait, Past Lives of Jesus? I had never even heard of that before. We were still talking and I was ordering the book online before, the conversation was even half over. I thought I have to find out more about that. I'm excited to talk about the book and to hear back from the listeners, perhaps, if they have thoughts about the episode after they listen. I'm wondering, too, how familiar everyone is with Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet. And Kathleen, would you like to share a little bit about Edgar Cayce for some background for the listeners?
Sure. I don't want to get into a whole lot of detail about Edgar Cayce. Much has been written about him. And as you said, Andrea, he was called the sleeping prophet. He was born in the late 1800s in Kentucky, was raised in a very rural, conservative family, and at an early age, he realized he was not like other people. For example, when he would fall asleep studying, he started to realize upon wakening that he knew the contents of the book simply because he had fallen asleep with his head on the book. And I mean, wouldn't that come in handy when we were in school? Mm-hmm. He was also very religious and very much interested in the Bible and studying it truly from cover to cover. He reread the Bible for every year of his life. At some point in his rather circuitous journey in life, he began to receive information that could only be coming from spirit. Eventually, he started doing these readings for people. He would actually lie on a sofa and he would go into some sort of a trance and begin speaking to the person in a voice that was not his, and clearly channeling some higher entity, some higher being. And he did thousands of readings over the course of his adult life when he was doing that work. He became famous as you can be at that time. And this was in the 30s and the 40s. So, of course, technology was nothing like it is today. But he became very famous in his own right, and people traveled from all over to receive a reading for him. That's a bit about the Edgar Cayce story. I don't need to go into all the details of his life. If you're interested in reading more about him, there have been plenty of books written about him. He had a fascinating life, and he is still considered probably one of the most reliable and gifted prophets we have ever seen. So it is an interesting life, and it is an interesting study.
And I'd like to add, too, a little bit about the readings that he did. According to the book, he had over 14,000 of these readings, and many of them were health-related. And he could actually diagnose people's conditions, and some of them were quite rare. But then he would even go further, and he would channel information for curing these conditions. And it went against what was known medically at the time. But then later on, the medical community confirmed the efficacy of what he was recommending to help these people. So he did give a lot of readings about health, medicine, but he also included a lot of other topics, such as ancient civilizations, prehistory, religion, psychology, meditation, dreams, and even prophecies about the future. So during these readings, he covered so many different subjects in quite a bit of detail. To underscore our topic for today, Edgar Cayce's secretary confirmed that the information on the past lives of Jesus was the subject that Edgar Cayce was most excited and interested in. And when I read that in the book, I was even more interested in finding out more about this because, as I mentioned, I had never even heard of this concept, although I did hear about Edgar Cayce in general through the years here and there, but didn't really know too much about him.
Yes, thank you for the extra information on Edgar Cayce, Andrea, and I think everyone can understand now what a enormous influence he was during his life on Earth. And what's interesting is what you also said about his fascination with the past lives of Jesus. And for him, this was a huge challenge when this information first began coming through, because as I said earlier, he was raised in a rural, very conservative family, very conservative religion, and there was no room in that religion for the subject of reincarnation on its own. But when you talked about Jesus being reincarnated and living other lives, that was just something that probably no one had ever even considered. So for him to finally embrace that and accept it as true was a huge step for him. But he did. And when he started to bring in that information and bring it through to people, it had an enormous impact on the people who were receiving that information. What's also interesting is he died in 1945, okay? It was after his death, it was in the 40s and in the 50s, when a lot of the ancient documents regarding early Christianity and its evolution were discovered in Egypt. Many of you have probably heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls and even perhaps the Nag Hammadi texts. And a lot of the information that Cayce was channeling during his life was confirmed in these texts and scrolls. There are numerous references to previous incarnations of Jesus, and the implication, the strong implication, and the connecting the dots type of thing, connecting these other individuals to the soul that became Jesus eventually. So that's interesting in and of itself when you consider that he died in 1945, and this information was discovered right about that time or slightly after. The timing is very interesting to me. Don't you think, Andrea?
Oh, I agree with that, Kathleen. I think it is really interesting. And to have that knowledge come through him is sort of out of the blue. It wasn't out before. That's pretty remarkable to me in and of itself, just to come out of thin air, I guess, so to speak, and then to have it confirmed later in these ancient texts. So it wasn't like somebody came up with it a few years later. It had been recorded all those years prior. It's just really fascinating to me. And to just think about this and wonder about it is, I don't know, I find it just kind of fun, kind of mysterious, but it's really what got me through the book, wanting to find out more.
Exactly. Oh, same here. It's a lot of information in the book. I mean, it's information dense. I think the author said he took 8 years to write this book. And if you do have the opportunity to read it, you'll be able to understand why. There is so much information and so much research. I can understand why it took him so long. What's also interesting, and that many of you may not know, and that I didn't know until I really started to delve into past lives and reincarnation years ago, was that reincarnation was included in the Bible originally. The Bible that was written, eons ago had many mentions of reincarnation. It was considered to be a given. It's something that happens. It wasn't any controversial topic, anything like that. That all started to change over time, especially during the Council of Constantinople. The Emperor Justinian and his minions, or the other powers that be, decided that they were going to remove some of the references to reincarnation in the Bible. The reason for that is widely believed to be that it would impact their power over the people. It would somehow lessen their control over the people if the public, the masses, knew that they could have another chance at this if they didn't get it right this time. And it's interesting because that wasn't the only time where references to reincarnation were removed. And if you do any research on this, you'll see that this was happening, and it happened more than once. That was a very big surprise to me. Honestly, it made me even more interested in learning about reincarnation and past lives, because it's something that's so widely accepted over the world, except in Christianity. And you have to wonder why, right? At least I always did. Why not Christianity when so many other religions just embrace it and accept it and it's no big deal?
Such a great question, Kathleen, because I grew up, we went to church. We weren't super regular and that kind of thing, but I had I think, pretty middle of the road religious upbringing, and I never knew anything about reincarnation. But when I was reading the book, certain things really grabbed my attention because, I have that science mind and I want to know facts and where did reincarnation go? Was it ever accepted? And in the book, it is said that Saint Jerome, he's a famous translator of the Bible into Latin. It was Saint Jerome indicating in one of his letters that reincarnation was accepted by many Christians, especially those in the Greek-speaking areas. And that was where most Christianity was centered. And so when I read that in the book, that made an impression on me. I thought, wow, that's really something I can hold on to. When I seek and when I ask questions, that's really the kind of thing that makes a difference for me. You mentioned the Nag Hammadi in Egypt. Those documents also reveal a belief in reincarnation by different Christian sects, including the Gnostics. So the more we research, the more we look back, the more we do see evidence of this. And like you said, what happened? What happened to it? I mean, I remember growing up so clearly, for some reason, this concept of reincarnation came up in conversation. Maybe it was on TV. And this relative of mine said, oh no, We get one shot and that's it. And I just remember thinking, wow, it seemed so final. I didn't really know what to believe, but you're right. In Christianity, we just don't talk about it, or at least we never did, when I was growing up. So I just never really considered it until much later in my life.
Same with me, Andrea. I was raised in the Catholic faith and church every Sunday, catechism classes, all the Holy Day, masses, etc., etc. Never was the subject of reincarnation entered into any discussion about our religion. That just didn't happen. And it was all a big surprise to me when it finally started to emerge into my life and became something that I ended up being incredibly fascinated by and still am to this day. I understand exactly what you're saying. And you wonder what happened to all that old information. And what happened to it, I think, is that it was removed by the powers that be at that time because they thought it would benefit them in some way to have that information removed. However, as the book says, there are still quite a few mentions of reincarnation in the Bible, and they're not as obvious as the ones that were removed, but they still exist. But they're open to interpretation, and I do have to caution you that if this is something that you're not really on board with, a lot of people are not, you may interpret it a different way, and that's okay. But there are still many mentions of reincarnation that exist in the Bible. So it hasn't been wiped out entirely. I just think it's been shrouded in mystery and so many changes over thousands of years, it just got lost at the wayside, truly.
Right. I think you bring up a good point too, and that is, people can come down anywhere they're comfortable with this. We're just opening a conversation about it. And even the book itself doesn't really seek to convince anybody one way or another, but just simply point out some historical background and open up that discussion for consideration of such a concept. Like you said when we first started, being open, just being open to other ideas and seeing if it resonates, and a little self-discovery perhaps along the way about where we are with our beliefs and why we believe things.
Exactly. And I think that's important. Being open, and as I like to say, remain curious. Curiosity is so important. And I know I can only speak for myself. And I know that on my spiritual journey, which is ongoing, of course, and it always will be, I have had to revisit, question, rethink, and discard, in many cases, some of my long-held beliefs, perspectives, viewpoints, attitudes, and values, because I realized as I continued on my journey, those things didn't serve me anymore. I was not that person anymore. I had grown, I had evolved, and those beliefs were outdated. And it does take time to release those, especially those that were conditioned from birth to believe. But you know when you know. It's that sense of knowing that you can't really explain, but when you know that something is true and resonant and real, you just do. For me, a lot of the things we talk about on our shows, our episodes, it's the truth. It is my truth. And I'm not saying that it has to be everyone else's truth. And I try to speak my truth whenever possible, but it's an ongoing journey. And I'm sure who I am today is going to be a lot different than who I am 10 years from now, or maybe even a year from now, who knows? But I have to remain open and curious, and always willing to let whatever knowledge comes my way to come my way, and take a look at it and see where it lands and take it from there.
Right. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the specifics that Edgar Cayce reported through his sessions. And what I'd like to introduce is this idea. This really blew my mind. I mean, my mind was blown many times as I read the book, but he indicated that Jesus's soul lived as many as 30 different lives, which I just found astounding. And the book doesn't go into all 30.
No, you're right, Andrea. It doesn't go into all 30. He mentions several of the remaining ones that he does not discuss in detail, but he only goes into 11 of these incarnations in depth. He has so much detail. As I said, it's very dense in information. But these are the ones he talks about in the book. The first one is Emilius. And that was an incarnation who was in spirit only. And according to Cayce, that spirit, that soul, that incarnation, if you will, took place during the time of Atlantis. Emilius came to Atlantis to try to convince the Atlanteans to change their ways because they were becoming very materialistic, very wrapped up in their physicality, going away from Source, becoming very non-spiritual. So Emilius was sent by Source, by God, however you wish to refer to the Creator, to go ahead and try to turn them around. Unfortunately, he was unsuccessful, and he then returned to the Creator and said, it just didn't happen, and I'm sorry. Well, we all know what happened to Atlantis. So it just disappeared into the ocean. All right, so that was Jesus' first incarnation, according to Edgar Cayce. Now, his second one is a name that is familiar to all of you, Adam, the first man described in the opening of the Bible. Of course, Adam. So that was the first physical incarnation, was in the form of Adam. Eve was fashioned from Adam, and Edgar Cayce describes her as a twin soul. And of course, once they ate from the apple and ruined their chances in the Garden of Eden, they had to endure human life and all its hardships. That's the way it goes. An early example of karma, if you will. You know, it's a balance, right? Enoch was the next one. Enoch was a man who walked with God, according to Genesis. Now, the thing that struck me about Enoch was, first of all, he did not die a physical death. He was just taken up into the heavens because he led a good life. When he was taken up, he became the archangel Metatron. And I find that absolutely fascinating because Metatron is an archangel with whom I have worked many times, and I found that just amazing. Moving on. The next incarnation was Melchizedek. That may be a name that's familiar to many of you as well. He was a priest who lived at the time of Abraham. After that, it was Joseph, the son of Jacob. And you may remember Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. That Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his brothers because they were jealous of him. After that, Jesus incarnated as Joshua. Joshua was the successor to Moses, who led the Israelites into the Promised Land. The next incarnation was Asaph. He was a musician in King David's court. And I have to confess, his name was new to me. I had never heard of Asaph. Jesus' next incarnation was Jeshua. Jeshua was a priest who helped reestablish the worship of God after the Israelites' return from captivity in Babylon. Then we had Zend. Zend was the father of the religious leader Zoroaster. You may have heard of the Zoroastrians. Zend was the father of Zoroaster, who founded that religion. Now finally, after Zend, Jesus the Christ, as we know him, incarnated in that form, and that was his final incarnation on earth as a human, to the best of our knowledge. We don't know if he has incarnated again. We just simply don't know.
And as a reminder, that's just a short list that the book goes into great depth to explain, to reference. I just at times had such a hard time wrapping my head around all of this, Kathleen, with the level of detail that the author goes into. And to illustrate another thing that was super challenging for me was the author actually presents information that the soul of Eve later incarnates as Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ. And I had to read and reread that, and I don't know if I can still comprehend that sort of idea. I don't know how you felt about that when you read it, Kathleen, but that is just one example for me where my mind just, I had a tough time with that. But it is fascinating. I just have to say.
Oh, it is. It's absolutely fascinating. But my reaction was, oh my goodness, I did not know this. And it's hard to wrap your head around these things. And as you said, the level of detail is astonishing. This author did an amazing job with his research and his attention to detail. There's no question. The final incarnation, at least as far as we know, was Jesus, who we know as Jesus of Nazareth, the one who died on the cross and became the foundation of Christianity. What do you think about all this, Andrea? What are your thoughts about the past lives of Jesus?
I don't even know if I can offer an answer to that. I think I'm still really just simmering with it all. What I can say for myself personally is I do believe in reincarnation. I most certainly do. Do I understand how it all works and all the different concepts? Absolutely not. I just resonate with the concept of reincarnation. And besides that, I would say I just do not see a case supporting no reincarnation. Because when I look at nature, nature is about cycles, whether it's the moon, the tides, the seasons, the sunrise and sunset each day. We have a continuum of experience that we see every day in every moment in the natural world. And I do not see and I do not feel any resonance with the idea that spiritually we wouldn't also have that continuum, that there'd be just a hard stop. Doesn't feel right to me. But again, I don't have all the answers, but it is something that I like to wonder about. And you mentioned this a moment ago. You said that the first time you read the book, you missed this or that. And I think I probably said the same thing as well. And that is so true because it reminds me many years ago when I first read Conversations with God. And I've mentioned that book before on the podcast because it rocked my world. But I love that because I want to be challenged and I want to decide with fresh eyes and fresh perspective what I believe and what I don't. And I just think that there's an aliveness to that. And it helps me know that, I'm on a path. It is the journey. I think we've said that so many times, but it's a journey. And what I believed 20 years ago is not what I believe now. And there you see again, a continuum. Nothing ever stops. Nothing natural stops. Everything evolves. A rock in the river, it's always changing. It might look the same for years to our naked eye, but it undergoes change over time. I think the book is a remarkable work just for all of the research that has gone into it. And it is something that when you go back and reread it, different things stick out to you. I know that is what happened for me, but I'd love to hear what you think about it, Kathleen.
Again, like you said, I could certainly echo your thoughts that this is a lot to wrap your head around. There's no question. But reincarnation in itself is a lot to wrap our heads around, especially if we're conditioned to learn something differently, at an early age. But I look at it this way. Not only is this a journey and a continuum, you're so right. I mean, the only thing that never changes is change, right? Everything is constantly changing, whether we want it to or not. We may not always notice it, but it's changing. And I'm no exception to that. You're no exception to that. There are no exceptions.
Right.
So that being said, I have a knowing, an inner knowing that reincarnation is real. It is a thing. It happens. when we exit this physical body, our consciousness continues. It is eternal. Our consciousness is eternal. And that has provided so much comfort to me over the years when I finally embraced and accepted that concept. And again, not having any history or background in this growing up, none at all. So much of what I know outside from the books and the training I've received comes from that inner knowing. And my work with Reiki, past lives, crystals, and all the modalities in which I work, a lot of that inner knowing comes from that, as well as my soul. My soul has reminded me of so many things over the years. So I feel this way about it. I accept and know that reincarnation exists and that consciousness is eternal. So why would I think that Jesus, the man, would be excluded from that? Why? There's really no reason why he would be excluded from that. After all, the Creator always wants his children, us, to be well and happy and healthy. He's giving us opportunities to do so. So he sends his beloved Son, his creation, to help us. And it didn't always work out, so he kept trying and trying and trying. For me, it just makes perfect sense that Jesus would have past lives.
Yeah, I think I kind of skipped over that Jesus part of the equation when you asked me that last question, and I went right into the reincarnation. And I probably did that subconsciously on purpose, but I'll circle back to that. And I think for myself, if I'm very honest, I think I held Jesus outside of everything else. I think it's very common perhaps for people to do that. I guess I should speak for myself. I had him in a category by himself, is what I would say. So that I don't think I really allowed him to be like the rest of us kind of thing. I think I always thought he was an exception to things. And so I never really considered a reincarnation sort of dynamic in that regard. I just always had him separate. And in reading the book and in reflecting, because I knew we would be talking about this today, I think I looked at it as a teacher. To me, if I think about Jesus, he's a teacher. And I believe that he was here to teach us, to show us the way. And if that is true, I don't know any other teacher or any other wonderful parent, no matter how loving, no matter how gifted, can only say the message once, and then the student completely grasps it and can live with that knowledge. So if I look at it that way, it would make sense that all of us here on earth, we didn't get the message over and over. And so a wonderful teacher will come back over and over for that lesson to be learned. If I frame it that way, it seems so natural that Jesus would come back over and over. But I think I would underscore for myself, I think I perhaps got a little too caught up in my idea that I probably formed many years ago about Jesus, and I forgot that it was the teachings. The teachings, I think, are so important. And I think sometimes we lose sight of the message in this idea of who he was. I hope that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And I like what you said about Jesus as a teacher, because he was a teacher. That is what he did. He traveled the world, apparently, according to Edgar Cayce in this book. He traveled the world. He didn't limit his teachings to the narrow area in which we think of him, that setting. He traveled to India and Persia and Egypt. So he was all over the place, preaching and teaching. What you said about him coming back to teach, it's so true, because as the book says, and this is all from the Cayce readings now, Jesus the soul, I'm going to refer to his soul as the master because that's what he is referred to in the book. he would go back to the Creator after each incarnation, realizing that he really hadn't accomplished his purpose, which was to make the people of Earth understand the way in which they needed to live. And even though he tried and tried in all these various incarnations, he never really felt that he accomplished his purpose. The final incarnation as Jesus was designed to really get everyone's attention because he was born of a woman, he lived as a man, he traveled, and he died. He died in a way that you could not ignore. And that was the idea of that particular lifetime. It was to get everyone's attention and hopefully turn them in the direction of the Creator and the light. And after that, he felt that his work was done on Earth. I mean, he still is very much among us, just not in human form, at least that we know of. And I keep qualifying that because who knows, right?
Right.
That incarnation as Jesus was the one that was supposed to be the linchpin. This was going to get everyone's attention and everyone would be okay, become spiritually aware, keep their faces to the light, that kind of thing. Well, we know how that went. It didn't go as planned, unfortunately. But that was his final incarnation, and that was his final attempt, although he still walks among us, at least in spirit, at least in spirit. I don't know about you, Andrea, but I know in Reiki sessions I've had with clients over the years, Jesus was present. I could sense his presence.
Yes.
My clients have reported feeling his presence. I've received information from him over the years. And like you, I always put him in his own special category. He was on a pedestal, obviously. It was Jesus, my goodness. But, you know, he is always available to help us. That is something we have done to him, but he doesn't see himself as that. Not at all. He wants to help us. He wants to continue that purpose of bringing us to the light, to the Creator. And, you know, of all the messages he gave, all the teachings he did over the years he taught, there was only one commandment that he really had. And I'm not talking about the 10 commandments. We all know those. Jesus had one commandment, and that one was love one another. Period. Amen. The end. Again, that hasn't happened. All you need to do is look at the history of our planet since Jesus's life as Jesus and know that that was not the way. It still is not the way. Fortunately, Spirit is still helping us and doing its best to lead us in the direction of the light, to turn us away from the things that are causing us harm and destroying each other and ourselves. We just need to remain open and curious to that.
You alluded to something interesting to me, Kathleen. You had said his last incarnation that we know of. And we don't know. I don't think any of us can be very sure about that. But it is an interesting question, isn't it? And so some would perhaps expect another incarnation of Jesus because, as you alluded to, we haven't gotten the message yet. We haven't gotten the message. And so does the teacher return as he did before, perhaps, to again teach? But something else stood out to me in what you just said, and that was Jesus appears in Reiki sessions or as a guide for many people. Many people speak to Jesus. Many people have the presence of Jesus in their life in any number of ways. And so the question that I like to imagine is, does he come back as he did before, if you believe the premise, in a human body? Or perhaps the awakening comes through the masses, through the individual connection and recognition of Jesus's message, the master, as you called him, the master's energy, love one another. Is that what we're seeing the beginnings of now here on earth? So much awakening has happened, and we're going through so much now. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it is just based on my practice and what I've heard of in your practice, the number of people who are becoming aware of their true nature as a spiritual being. I think there is that awakening happening across the globe. I truly believe that. Again, it's that inner knowing. Once we reach a tipping point where the awakening takes on such a force, it becomes more of a tidal wave, that is when we're going to start to see the real change, the real obvious, visible, tangible change. That is what I see happening once we reach that tipping point. And I just want to touch very briefly on what you said earlier about Jesus and how he comes to us in our sessions and our clients sometimes, and other people I know who have experienced the presence of Jesus. This just came to me, and I think my guides are telling me this, that Jesus is still in spirit because his work can be done so much easier when he's in spirit right now, because he can touch so many people in so many ways all at once, because it's not like he has to go to me and then to you. It's not a matter of time, that's such a human construct. He can touch and interact and be a presence for millions, if not billions of people all at once. So in order to reach the largest number of individuals, I think his work is still in spirit. That is what my guides are telling me now.
I couldn't agree with you more. And one other little detail that comes to my mind is no one can filter his message when he comes directly to the individual. There is no editing of the message, no leaving out of certain facts or happenings. None of that can happen. The Dead Sea Scrolls or whatever's been written doesn't matter. When the communication is direct and it comes right through our heart.
Excellent point.
It just doesn't get any truer than that.
Exactly.
And I don't know about you and the listeners, but when something resonates as truth within me and I get those goosebumps, woo, it's like I'm a driven person. I have the energy and the inspiration to make change. And to me, that is a recipe for hope. Hope in these times of everything that we're facing. And it is not an accident that the whole world is going through something just like we're going through now, because there are a lot of people out there listening like they've never listened before.
Oh, that is so true. Absolutely. As difficult as these times are, I'm so glad that I'm living in them now. I know I chose this time to incarnate, and I'm glad because I'm honored to be a part of it. I can't imagine living at any other time where I could do this much good or have this much purpose that matters so much.
I so agree. This is what I call the great transformation, and it's very exciting. It isn't all roses, that's for sure, but this is a time of great change and opportunity. Kathleen and I hope that this episode, that's been a little bit different this time around, invites you to perhaps consider some new perspectives and allows you to go deeper into perhaps long-held beliefs and considering some of the mysteries out there. We always welcome your feedback and your questions, so please drop us a line, and you can find the link to the book that we referenced down in the show notes. Until next time, we wish you the highest blessings, peace, love, joy, and understanding. Thank you for being with us. We thank you again for joining us. And of course, we invite you to join us next time as we journey beyond the Reiki Gateway with Kathleen Johnson and Andrea Kennedy.